Ethics and matters of morality are not written across the cosmos as absolute properties of the universe. What is considered right and wrong vary from time to time and among different cultures. Think of the different ways that women should or shouldn't be treated across cultures and time. Ideas of what is correct or wrong about marriage and sexual matters also illustrate these differences. We regard human slavery today in our society as abominable, but not so many decades ago, many accepted it as permissible, and it was once widespread. And official racism was once widely accepted. As time passes and cultures evolve, what is considered right versus wrong changes. We now regard practices and attitudes once widely accepted as quite inappropriate. To believe that we are now somehow perfect in our assessment of morals is foolishness. What do we do now that will be frowned upon in the future? Malachi Talik, author of Illuminated by Water, says, quote, "An ethical person is not one who believes they have all the answers, but one who continues to ask the questions." End of quote. What is considered as moral is entangled in a web of ambiguity. I want to expand with a few examples that have moral ambiguity. It was on an autumn day in the 1970s that my friend Lauren led me into the hardware store to buy what I needed to begin fly fishing. Fishing equipment was on sale, and I bought some cheap items, a rod, reel, line, some flies. I think the rod and reel cost me all of $30. We can spend well over $1,000 today. Soon after, I tried to catch fish with this stuff, but I had no luck. The next summer, I tried to catch fish in the Blackfoot River. That is the river that Norman McLean actually fished in his classic, A River Runs Through It. I got the line wrapped around my feet and at that point decided to give up fly fishing. A few years later, I used that equipment once more in Montana. The summer, my father helped me with my field work. We wet our lines in the Yellowstone River just north of the park, and I snagged, that is, foul caught, one small trout on the side. That was the only fish I ever caught on that rod. That piece of gear now hangs in my study wall, somewhat of a museum piece. In 1999, after reading some books on fly fishing, I decided to try again. That time I bought a finer rod and reel, then took them into my backyard to see if I could cast a fly. It worked. I could make a decent cast, and I was off on a new hobby. As almost inevitably happens, I bought more toys. I now own 6 rods, several reels, a couple nets, a pair or two of waders, and more. Then I started tying flies, and that meant more equipment, which I also upgraded to higher quality. I now have more flies than I can count, and most will never see water. I catch a lot of bluegills, some bass, a few trout, and once even a catfish. I don't fish that much, but I do consider myself a fisherman. For various reasons, I always return the fish to the water. Catch and release, it's called. I use barbless hooks and get the fish back into the habitat as quickly as possible. It was then with some surprise that Lauren, that friend who introduced me to fly fishing 50 years ago, told me recently that catch and release fishing is an abomination. Lauren says, and I quote him, "My main objection to catch and release is the act itself. What do we do when we hook a fish? We play it at the end of a line, much as we would play with a toy. Is it ethical to live in a living animal as a toy? I don't think so. All the pleasure goes to the fisher. The fish gets nothing but a painful experience. End of quote. This gives me great pause. Am I being immoral by fishing, and catch and release fishing in particular? In the past few decades, catch and release fishing has become an accepted thing to do and a more environmental practice. This is especially true on waters containing wild populations of fish. On put and take waters stocked with farm-raised fish for people to catch and take home, the practice of catch and release is of less environmental importance. But in general, catch and release is seen by many as the environmentally moral thing to do. So now we are asked to consider whether this kind of fishing or any sport fishing at all is moral. Now I realize that many of you are not anglers. The only fishing you probably do is at high V. That's where Betsy and I get the fish that we actually eat. In his 2022 book, Illuminated by Water, Malachi Talik addresses the topic of the morality of fishing in one of his essays. Talik is a fisherman, but he gets into the philosophy of the question of morality of fishing deeper than most others I have come across. The question revolves around the notion that fish feel pain just as we do, and being caught in the mouth by a sharp hook and hauled into the hands of an alien creature, the angler, is torture, just as it would be for one of us. Would any of us be willing to do such a thing to a dog, or a cat, or a squirrel, or a bird without feeling guilty? Probably not. So why do we not feel empathy for the fish, that lowliest of the vertebrates? When this is even considered by many anglers, many shrug off the question and claim that fish don't feel pain. However, there is scientific evidence that fish behave as if they do feel pain. Whether they feel pain as we would is not so clearly demonstrated, but they must feel something. There is increasing evidence that many animals have an internal life of consciousness. So are we causing torture to sentient creatures by our catch and release fishing? Is fishing an immoral thing to do? Talik says that using barbless hooks and releasing fish back into the water as unharmed as possible is a rather recent practice. Right up to the 20th century, anglers caught as many fish as possible and either took them home or threw them up onto the bank to die. That slaughter would bring a cringe to most anglers today, he says. But as we try to save numbers of wild fish and still enjoy our fishing, are we not causing pain for sentient creatures? Can a moral person enjoy sport fishing? PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, answer that question with a no. However, I have some reservations about PETA's assessments. That organization recently wanted inanimate horses to be removed from merry-go-rounds on the basis of a depiction of animals being used for transportation. A bit overboard, I think. Although scientists have demonstrated how fish respond to something akin to pain, others have pointed out that fish don't have the same brain structure found in mammals. It has been shown that fish can be caught and released several times in a day. I've had that experience in my own fishing. So the question remains open. Now that might appear to be anglers rationalizing defense of their practice by biased arguments. But how far down the phylogenetic scale can we extend the appearances of reaction to possible pain to recognizing real suffering? Animals. Animals, after all, include people, cats, dogs, cows, bears, eagles, sparrows, rattlesnakes, alligators, flies, mosquitoes, earthworms, flatworms, jellyfish, sponges, and under my microscope I see many microscopic rotifers within a single drop of water. To what level do we need to be ethical to these animals? Are fish within the range we owe humanistic treatment? If we view fish in an anthropomorphic sense, like they're little people with fins swimming around, eating insects and smaller fish, then hooking them in the lip is cruel treatment. But are fish like little people? Here's where things become sticky. I can find microscopic organisms that react to influences in their environment that almost look as though they are feeling pain. Do we assume that they are sentient and capable of feeling pain? I don't think so. But fish, I don't know. Talbot goes on to discuss Peter Singer's book, Animal Liberation, and his utilitarian point of view. In effect, it's okay to harm or kill an animal if the benefits to humans outweigh the suffering of that animal. If developing a vaccine that saves the lives of many people is done by animal experimentation, it's okay. Of course, this is the assessment made by a human, and the animals in the experiments may not agree. Tom Regan, another animal rights philosopher, views inherent value of all animals and suggests we kill no animal. Some animals, he claims, possess the same rights as humans. Quoting Talbot again, quote, crucially, he, meaning Regan, argues that human beings should not place our own interests above those of an animal. We should not place our desire to eat a pig, for instance, over the interest that that pig has in remaining alive. A philosopher, Jeff McMahon, wrote that the ethical thing is for the extinction of all carnivorous species. That would include wolves, foxes, lions, tigers, eagles, woodpeckers, snakes, alligators, many fish, spiders, and others. Apparently he was serious, but the ecosystems work by things eating other things. Nature works that way. To imagine otherwise is preposterous, says Talbot. But how far down that phylogenetic tree do we go with this inherent value? Do we include flies at a picnic? Do we include fish? Sport fishing and practice of catch and release in particular certainly raises some ethical questions in an area of moral ambiguity. Will my moral decisions condemn me to hell if I believed in such a place? Should I cast my 6 rods and all that other gear into the garbage? But before throwing away all my gear, let us consider some other activities that have moral ambiguity. We know that human activity is causing a warming of the planet, and that other things we do endanger many species of plants and animals, as well as the welfare of many people. Our power plants, automobiles, airplanes, ships, the homes we live in, making the sidewalk in front of your house, and many other features of our way of living release global warming gases, mostly carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Each of us is adding to the causes of global warming, some more than others. Now the question arises, is it morally wrong to visit our kids on the West Coast, fly to London on a sightseeing trip, or visit the pyramids along the Nile. We, including myself here, do these things that cause or add to suffering of animals and other human beings in the long run. Should we forego that trip to Ireland? Is that, in the big scheme of things, wrong? There are 8 billion people on the earth at this time. The impact of all these people is devastating to natural ecosystems. Some have referred to this time as the 6th great extinction of plants and animals in the last 500 million years of Earth history. Now I ask, if in today's world, is it morally responsible to have children? Or maybe more than 2 children per couple? Oh, that's a topic we don't like to think about. Folks, in some cultures and certain religions would even call that question blasphemy. There are those who believe eating animal flesh is immoral. Some have become very passionate about it. Of course, they have their right to eat as they please, but those folks' diet exists mostly because we have the luxury of going to the supermarket and selecting items grown over large parts of the world. Besides the transportation of the food, how that food is grown and what has died as a result of that farming is often either not known or is conveniently ignored. If we consider the grains, fruits, and vegetables that we can grow locally here in Iowa, we must consider the materials used in the manufacture of those big John Deere tractors, the fuel they use, and the fertilizers and pesticides that are applied. Storing the grains and vegetables involves the killing of mice and insects that might get into that food supply. A vegetarian diet on only those things we can grow in Iowa would be possible, but it might be a bit dull. Our eating bananas, oranges, pineapples, avocados involves lots of long-distance transportation and other environmental impacts. Whether we are vegetarians or carnivores, our diet is like flying to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower. Let's consider the moral implications of millions of people living across the world who have little choice in what they eat in the face of food shortage. Living here in the land of plenty, we make fuel for our cars out of corn that could be used as food. Is it then a moral matter when we choose which button to push on the gas pump? Is it moral to fill the tank with gasoline containing ethanol? Ethanol requires more energy in total than it provides. It is more harmful to the environment than it does good. Ethanol is merely a subsidy for the farmers. Humans are animals, and as animals, we're part of nature. It's been said that nature is cruel, but nature is reality. It is neither cruel nor a Disney wonderland. It is in our anthropocentric attitude that we see nature as cruel. That view is engendered by the fact that many things eat other things to live. There are things that eat diatoms that are then eaten by other things all the way up to a dinner at Red Lobster or that eagle flying overhead. Hawks swoop down to catch and eat rabbit or squirrel in my backyard. Out in the garden, there are animals eating the tomatoes that are then parasitized by other animals, which are then eaten by others. Do we apply pesticides to protect those vegetables? Do we thin the herds of deer that wander through Cedar Falls eating our vegetables and decorative plants? Remember that there are 8 billion people living on the earth right now. and permitting insects and other animals to eat too much would result in more people going hungry. The rich diversity of the ecosystem on Earth operates that way. Dalek says, quote, to imagine that human beings can, like the angels, rise above all this and wash their hands of harm is fantasy. End of quote. It's been suggested that there is little we can do that doesn't have moral questions attached. Loving thy neighbor isn't really an action, but what action comes from that love is fraught with moral ambiguity. Actions that we in the UU circles today consider as moral activity may not be considered moral in the future. As Talek reminds us that an ethical person is not one who thinks they have the answers, but one who questions. Meanwhile, we make decisions and live our lives as well as we can. We cannot look back from some future time and assess our actions today. The dilemma is that as much as I want to be moral, I enjoy fishing. There is more about fishing than merely catching a fish, a lot more. But am I being immoral? Likewise, I enjoy eating meat. Not great quantities of it, but I do like meat in many of my dishes. Many people want to buy the cheapest fuel, so they put into their cars the stuff that has ethanol in it. Many of us also like to travel, and there are many other things that we do that have moral considerations to them. Many of the alternatives to our moral choices are loaded with other moral questions of equal weight. So what do? Can we live a perfect life? We are not angels that can rise above these ambiguities and wash our hands of all harm. I guess the lesson to take away is to try to do the right thing, but not to become too self-righteous. Our decisions are morally complex, and the right one today may not be considered the right one in the future.